These classified documents from Pfizer, the CDC, and intelligence agencies contain evidence of the most horrific conspiracy against humanity ever documented. Population reduction through mandatory medical interventions disguised as vaccines. I am Director James Morrison, and I can no longer stay silent about the genocide being committed in the name of public health. What I'm about to reveal will challenge everything you've been told about vaccines, public health, and the pharmaceutical industry. For decades, Americans have trusted that vaccines were developed to protect their health and the health of their children. Tonight, I'm going to prove that vaccines have been weaponized as part of a systematic population control program coordinated between pharmaceutical companies, intelligence agencies, and global organizations committed to reducing the world's population. The evidence comes from classified intelligence reports, internal pharmaceutical company communications, and secret government documents that were never meant to see daylight. What these documents reveal will horrify every parent and grandparent in America. This isn't about being pro-vaccine or anti-vaccine. This is about exposing a deliberate conspiracy to use medical interventions to control and reduce human population while generating trillions in profits for those implementing the program. The foundation of this conspiracy lies in documents produced by global organizations that view human population growth as an existential threat to planetary resources and elite control systems. Dr. Margaret Chen worked as a policy analyst for the World Health Organization's Population Health Division. Her job was to develop strategies for managing global population growth through public health interventions. What Dr. Chen discovered was that WHO's population health strategies weren't designed to improve human health. They were designed to reduce human fertility and increase mortality rates in targeted populations while maintaining the appearance of humanitarian medical programs. Chen documented how WHO coordinated with pharmaceutical companies to develop vaccines that contain sterilization agents, immune system suppressants, and genetic modification compounds designed to reduce fertility and increase susceptibility to disease. The program specifically targeted developing nations with high birth rates, but Chen discovered that similar population control vaccines were being developed for deployment in developed nations, including the United States. Internal WHO communications that Chen preserved show explicit discussions about using vaccine programs to achieve population reduction targets set by global elite organizations concerned about resource depletion and social control. The documents use clinical language to describe what amounts to systematic genocide, fertility reduction interventions, immune system modulation, and genetic expression modification. When Chen attempted to expose these programs, she was terminated for policy disagreements and threatened with prosecution for allegedly stealing confidential documents. The population control vaccine program requires coordination between pharmaceutical manufacturers and intelligence agencies to ensure global implementation and suppress opposition. Dr. Robert Hayes worked as a research coordinator for Pfizer's Vaccine Development Division. His job was to manage clinical trials and ensure that vaccine safety data met regulatory requirements. What Hayes discovered was that Pfizer's vaccine research wasn't focused on preventing disease. It was focused on developing compounds that could modify human biology to achieve population control objectives while maintaining plausible deniability about adverse effects. Hayes documented how Pfizer coordinated with CIA contractors to develop vaccines containing engineered compounds designed to accumulate in reproductive organs, modify genetic expression, and suppress immune system function. The clinical trials Hayes managed were designed to hide these effects by using statistical manipulation, selective reporting, and short-term observation periods that couldn't detect long-term reproductive and genetic damage. Hayes preserved communications showing coordination between Pfizer executives and intelligence community representatives about deploying population control vaccines under emergency use authorizations that bypassed normal safety testing. The documents reveal that adverse effects weren't unintended consequences. They were intended outcomes designed to achieve population reduction while maintaining the appearance of medical intervention gone wrong. When Hayes attempted to report these activities through FDA channels, He was told that his concerns were being investigated, but the investigation was classified and he couldn't be informed of the results. The Centers for Disease Control serves as the primary institution responsible for suppressing evidence of vaccine-related population control programs and managing public narratives about vaccine safety. Dr. Susan Rodriguez worked as an epidemiologist for the CDC's Vaccine Safety Monitoring Division. Her job was to track adverse events following vaccination and identify potential safety signals that required investigation. What Rodriguez discovered was that CDC's vaccine safety monitoring wasn't designed to detect safety problems. It was designed to suppress evidence of safety problems while creating the appearance of rigorous safety surveillance. Rodriguez documented how adverse event reports related to fertility problems, immune system dysfunction, and genetic abnormalities were systematically reclassified as unrelated to vaccination or attributed to other causes. The CDC developed sophisticated statistical techniques for hiding vaccine-related adverse events by spreading them across multiple diagnostic categories, attributing them to pre-existing conditions, and using comparison groups that had also received population control vaccines. Rodriguez preserved evidence showing that CDC officials received direct instructions from intelligence community representatives about which adverse events to investigate and which to dismiss without investigation. The most damaging evidence Rodriguez collected was internal communications showing CDC officials celebrating successful suppression of adverse event data that could have exposed the population control vaccine program. When Rodriguez attempted to publish independent analysis of vaccine safety data, she was terminated for misuse of government resources and threatened with prosecution for allegedly violating data confidentiality agreements. One of the primary objectives of the population control vaccine program is systematic destruction of human fertility through compounds specifically designed to accumulate in reproductive organs. Dr. Jennifer Walsh worked as a reproductive endocrinologist studying fertility problems in women of childbearing age. Her research focused on identifying environmental and medical factors contributing to declining fertility rates. What Walsh discovered was that fertility problems were disproportionately affecting women who had received specific vaccines, particularly COVID-19 vaccines and HPV vaccines that contain novel adjuvants and delivery systems. Walsh documented how these vaccines contained compounds that accumulated in ovaries and testes, causing inflammation, cellular damage, and disruption of hormone production necessary for reproduction. The compounds were specifically engineered to cross biological barriers and concentrate in reproductive tissues, where they caused permanent damage disguised as natural aging or environmental factors. Walsh preserved tissue samples and laboratory data, proving that vaccine components were detectable in reproductive organs months after vaccination, and correlated with structural damage consistent with deliberately induced infertility. Most disturbing, Walsh discovered that the fertility effects were dose-dependent and cumulative, meaning that multiple vaccinations caused progressively more severe reproductive damage. When Walsh attempted to publish her research, she was told that her studies were flawed and couldn't be replicated, despite providing detailed methodology and raw data to other researchers. Population control vaccines are designed to progressively weaken immune system function, making recipients more susceptible to infections, cancers, and autoimmune diseases that reduce lifespan and quality of life. Dr. Michael Foster worked as an immunologist studying autoimmune diseases and immune system dysfunction. His research focused on understanding why autoimmune diseases were increasing rapidly in developed nations. What Foster discovered was that immune system problems were strongly correlated with vaccination history, particularly in individuals who had received multiple vaccines containing novel adjuvants and immune-modulating compounds. Foster documented how these vaccines contained compounds designed to overstimulate immune responses initially, then cause immune system exhaustion and dysfunction that left recipients vulnerable to diseases they should normally be able to fight. The immune system suppression was designed to occur gradually over years, making it difficult to connect vaccine exposure to subsequent health problems while ensuring that vaccinated populations would require ongoing medical interventions to manage chronic diseases. Foster preserved laboratory data showing that vaccine components caused measurable immune system dysfunction that worsened with each additional vaccination, creating a progressive cycle of immune degradation. The most chilling evidence Foster collected was internal pharmaceutical communications describing immune system suppression as planned obsolescence for human biology, deliberately engineered to create lifelong medical dependency while reducing lifespan. When Foster attempted to present his research at medical conferences, he was told that his abstracts were rejected for methodological concerns that were never specifically explained. Advanced population control vaccines contain genetic modification technologies designed to alter human DNA and create heritable changes that affect future generations. Dr. Lisa Park worked as a geneticist studying the effects of mRNA vaccines on cellular function and gene expression. Her research focused on understanding how genetic therapies could be used to treat inherited diseases. What Park discovered was that mRNA vaccines weren't designed to provide temporary immunity. They were designed to permanently modify human genetic expression in ways that would be passed to future generations. Park documented how mRNA vaccine technology was being used to introduce genetic modifications that would reduce fertility, increase disease susceptibility, and modify behavioral and cognitive characteristics in vaccinated populations and their offspring. The genetic modifications were specifically designed to accumulate in germline cells, sperm and eggs, where they would become part of the genetic inheritance passed to children and grandchildren of vaccinated individuals. Park preserved laboratory evidence showing that mRNA from vaccines was detectable in reproductive cells and was actively modifying genetic expression in ways that would affect multiple generations. Most terrifying, Park discovered that the genetic modifications were designed to become more pronounced in subsequent generations, meaning that children and grandchildren of vaccinated individuals would experience more severe effects than the original vaccine recipients. When Park attempted to publish her research, she was told that genetic modification research was classified and discussing it publicly could constitute a national security violation. Population control vaccines include neurological components designed to modify behavior, reduce aggression, and increase compliance with authority figures. Dr. David Chen worked as a neurologist studying the effects of medical interventions on brain function and behavior. His research focused on understanding how pharmaceutical compounds affected cognitive function and personality. What Chen discovered was that certain vaccines contained compounds specifically designed to cross the blood-brain barrier and modify neurotransmitter function in ways that would reduce independent thinking and increase submission to authority. Chen documented how these neurological modifications were designed to create populations that were more compliant, less questioning of authority, and more accepting of government control over their lives. The behavioral modification components were specifically engineered to reduce critical thinking abilities while maintaining basic cognitive function necessary for economic productivity. Chen preserved brain imaging data showing measurable changes in brain structure and function following vaccination with compounds designed to modify behavior and cognitive function. The most disturbing evidence Chen collected was pharmaceutical research documents describing behavioral modification as essential for managing populations during the transition period when population reduction programs were being implemented. When Chen attempted to report his findings to medical authorities, he was told that his research was based on unfounded theories, and continuing to promote such ideas could result in loss of his medical license. The population control vaccine program specifically targets children to ensure maximum lifetime exposure to population control compounds and normalize medical intervention as routine childhood experience. Dr. Patricia Williams worked as a pediatrician in a major hospital system. Her job was to ensure that children received all recommended vaccinations according to CDC schedules. What Williams discovered was that pediatric vaccine schedules weren't designed to protect children's health. They were designed to maximize exposure to population control compounds during critical developmental periods when the effects would be most pronounced and permanent. Williams documented how vaccine schedules were specifically timed to coincide with crucial developmental milestones when children's immune, reproductive, and neurological systems were most vulnerable to permanent modification. The pediatric targeting was designed to ensure that population control effects would be established before children reached reproductive age, guaranteeing that future generations would inherit the genetic and biological modifications introduced through vaccination. Williams preserved medical records showing patterns of developmental problems, immune dysfunction, and behavioral changes in heavily vaccinated children compared to unvaccinated children in her practice. Most heartbreaking, Williams discovered that parents were being systematically misled about vaccine contents and purposes while their children were being used as test subjects for population control experiments. When Williams attempted to reduce vaccination recommendations for her patients, she was terminated for failure to follow evidence-based medical guidelines and reported to medical licensing authorities for endangering patient safety. The population control vaccine program operates through coordinated efforts between pharmaceutical companies, government agencies, international organizations, and private foundations committed to population reduction. Colonel Sarah Mitchell worked as a military intelligence analyst studying global health initiatives and their implications for national security. Her job was to assess whether international health programs posed threats to American interests. What Mitchell discovered was that global health programs weren't humanitarian initiatives. They were coordinated efforts to implement population control technologies on a global scale while generating profits for participating organizations. Mitchell documented how organizations like the World Health Organization, Gavi Alliance, and Gates Foundation coordinated with pharmaceutical companies and intelligence agencies to deploy population control vaccines worldwide. The coordination included standardized messaging about vaccine safety and necessity, suppression of research showing vaccine-related adverse effects, and financial incentives for governments and healthcare providers to maximize vaccination rates. Mitchell preserved communications showing explicit coordination between these organizations about achieving population reduction targets through vaccine programs while maintaining public support for vaccination. The most damning evidence Mitchell collected was strategic planning documents describing vaccination as the most effective method for achieving rapid population reduction without public resistance or economic disruption. When Mitchell attempted to report these findings through military channels, she was told that her analysis was classified and discussing it outside secure channels would constitute unauthorized disclosure of classified information. The population control vaccine program generates enormous profits for participating organizations while creating financial incentives for healthcare providers to maximize vaccination rates regardless of medical necessity. Dr. Jennifer Foster worked as a hospital administrator, managing financial relationships with pharmaceutical companies and government health programs. Her job was to maximize revenue from medical services while maintaining quality patient care. What Foster discovered was that hospitals and healthcare providers received substantial financial incentives for achieving high vaccination rates, regardless of patient health outcomes or medical necessity. Foster documented how these financial incentives created systematic pressure on healthcare providers to recommend vaccines even when they might not be medically appropriate for individual patients. The financial structure was designed to ensure that healthcare providers would become economically dependent on vaccination programs and financially motivated to suppress concerns about vaccine safety or effectiveness. Foster preserved financial records showing that hospitals received bonuses for vaccination rates that exceeded normal medical service payments, creating strong economic incentives to maximize vaccination regardless of patient welfare. Most disturbing, Foster discovered that insurance companies coordinated with government programs to penalize providers who didn't achieve vaccination targets, effectively forcing medical compliance with population control programs. When Foster attempted to reduce her hospital's dependence on vaccination revenue, she was told that such changes could compromise the hospital's financial viability and result in service reductions that would harm patient care. The population control vaccine program requires suppression of effective alternative treatments that could prevent or treat diseases without population control effects. Dr. Robert Rodriguez worked as a researcher studying natural and alternative treatments for infectious diseases. His research focused on identifying effective treatments that could provide immunity without the side effects associated with vaccines. What Rodriguez discovered was that effective alternative treatments were systematically suppressed, discredited, or banned to ensure that vaccination remained the only acceptable method for disease prevention. Rodriguez documented how pharmaceutical companies and government agencies coordinated to suppress research on vitamin therapies, natural immunity, and other approaches that could provide protection without population control effects. The suppression included manipulation of research funding, persecution of researchers studying alternatives, and regulatory barriers that made alternative treatments effectively unavailable to the public. Rodriguez preserved communications showing explicit coordination between pharmaceutical companies and regulatory agencies to eliminate competition from effective treatments that didn't support population control objectives. Most revealing, Rodriguez discovered internal documents describing alternative treatments as threats to program compliance that needed to be eliminated to ensure vaccination remained the only available option. When Rodriguez attempted to publish research on effective alternative treatments, he was told that his studies couldn't be replicated, and his research funding was terminated for failure to produce meaningful results. The population control vaccine program uses emergency authorizations in public health emergencies to bypass normal safety testing and deploy experimental population control technologies without informed consent. Dr. Amanda Hayes worked as a regulatory affairs specialist for the FDA's Vaccine Approval Division. Her job was to ensure that vaccines met safety and efficacy requirements before being approved for public use. What Hayes discovered was that emergency use authorizations weren't being used for genuine emergencies. They were being used to deploy experimental population control technologies without the safety testing that would expose their true purposes. Hayes documented how pharmaceutical companies coordinated with government officials to create artificial emergencies that justified bypassing normal regulatory requirements for vaccine approval. The emergency authorizations were specifically designed to prevent the long-term safety studies that would reveal reproductive, genetic, and neurological effects of population control vaccines. Hayes preserved internal FDA communications, showing that officials knew vaccines contained experimental compounds that hadn't been adequately tested for safety, but approved them anyway under emergency authorization procedures. Most damaging, Hayes discovered that the emergency authorization process was designed to establish legal immunity for pharmaceutical companies while removing informed consent requirements that would allow people to refuse experimental medical interventions. When Hayes attempted to raise concerns about safety testing shortcuts, she was told that emergency conditions required accepting higher risks and that questioning emergency authorizations could undermine public health response capabilities. The population control vaccine program requires comprehensive media coordination to suppress negative information about vaccines while promoting messaging that encourages maximum uptake of population control interventions. Marcus Williams worked as a communications coordinator for a major media organization. His job was to develop news coverage about health and medical topics. What Williams discovered was that vaccine coverage wasn't based on independent journalism. It was based on coordinated messaging developed by pharmaceutical companies and intelligence agencies to promote population control objectives. Williams documented how news organizations received detailed guidance about which vaccine stories to cover, which experts to interview, and which perspectives to promote or suppress. The coordination included financial incentives for media organizations to promote vaccination while suppressing stories about vaccine-related adverse events or alternative treatments. Williams preserved communications showing explicit coordination between news organizations, pharmaceutical companies, and government agencies about managing public opinion regarding vaccination. Most revealing, Williams discovered that the media coordination was described internally as narrative warfare, designed to overcome public resistance to experimental medical interventions through psychological manipulation. When Williams attempted to produce independent journalism about vaccine safety concerns, He was told that such coverage could undermine public health, and his stories were killed or heavily edited to remove critical information. The population control vaccine program is currently active and expanding to include new vaccines targeting additional aspects of human biology and behavior. Based on intelligence from current sources within the pharmaceutical and intelligence communities, the population control vaccine program has achieved significant progress toward its objectives. Fertility rates in heavily vaccinated populations have declined dramatically. Immune system dysfunction has increased substantially in vaccinated populations. Genetic modifications have been successfully introduced into human populations and are being passed to subsequent generations. New vaccines are being developed that target specific genetic populations, age groups, and geographic regions with customized population control compounds designed for maximum effectiveness in different populations. The program is expanding beyond traditional vaccines to include nasal sprays, oral medications, and even food additives that can deliver population control compounds without requiring injection. My sources indicate that the next phase of the program will include mandatory vaccination for all ages and regular booster requirements to ensure continuous exposure to updated population control compounds. Despite systematic suppression, a network of healthcare providers, researchers, and intelligence community members are working to expose and resist the population control vaccine program. Courageous healthcare providers across the country are documenting vaccine-related adverse events, providing alternative treatments, and educating patients about the risks of participation in population control programs. These medical professionals risk their careers, their licenses, and their freedom to protect their patients from experimental medical interventions disguised as public health measures. They are preserving evidence, treating vaccine-injured patients, and developing protocols for reversing some of the damage caused by population control vaccines. Independent researchers are conducting studies that pharmaceutical companies and government agencies refuse to conduct, documenting the true effects of population control vaccines on human health and biology. These researchers are publishing findings through independent media and alternative platforms that can't be suppressed through traditional academic and regulatory channels. Their work provides the scientific foundation for understanding and potentially reversing the biological damage caused by population control vaccination programs. The population control vaccine program violates fundamental constitutional rights, including informed consent, bodily autonomy, and protection from medical experimentation without consent. The program operates through coordinated legal and regulatory changes that eliminate traditional protections against forced medical interventions while creating legal immunity for organizations implementing population control programs. Emergency authorities are being used to bypass constitutional protections and create legal frameworks that allow mandatory participation in experimental medical programs. The legal structure is designed to prevent judicial review and eliminate individual rights to refuse participation in population control experiments. The population control vaccine program violates every principle established by the Nuremberg Code regarding medical experimentation on human subjects. Participants are not informed about the experimental nature of the interventions, the risks involved, or the true purposes of the programs they are being required to participate in. The program specifically targets vulnerable populations, including children, elderly individuals, and those with limited ability to resist medical coercion. The population control vaccine program represents an unprecedented attack on human sovereignty and biological integrity, with implications that extend far beyond individual health effects. The genetic modifications being introduced through vaccination are designed to create permanent changes in human biology that will affect all future generations. These modifications are intended to create a population that is more controllable, less capable of independent thought, and more dependent on medical interventions for survival. The ultimate objective is to transform humanity into a managed species that serves the interests of those implementing the population control program. The program represents the implementation of a global control system that uses medical interventions to manage population size, behavior, and genetic characteristics according to the preferences of global elite organizations. Success of the program would eliminate human freedom, sovereignty, and the ability to resist authoritarian control systems. The implications extend beyond current populations to include all future generations who would inherit the genetic and biological modifications introduced through vaccination. Humanity faces the most important choice in its history: accept managed existence as a controlled species, or resist the population control vaccine program and preserve human sovereignty and biological integrity. The evidence I've presented tonight proves that vaccines are being used as weapons in a war against human freedom and biological integrity. Traditional medical and legal systems have been captured by organizations implementing population control and cannot provide protection against this systematic assault on humanity. The only protection is informed individual choice and organized resistance by people who understand the true nature of the threat they face. Every day that passes, more people receive population control vaccines that will damage their health, modify their genetics, and compromise their ability to resist authoritarian control. Every vaccine injection brings humanity closer to permanent biological enslavement by organizations that view human beings as expendable resources to be managed rather than sovereign individuals with inherent rights. The window for resistance is closing rapidly as population control effects accumulate and legal systems eliminate options for refusal. I've spent my career serving institutions I believed protected human welfare and freedom. Tonight, I've presented evidence that these institutions have become the primary threat to human survival and sovereignty. I've fulfilled my oath to protect America by exposing domestic enemies of human freedom and biological integrity. Now it's up to every individual to decide whether they will accept managed existence as a controlled species or fight to preserve human sovereignty and the right to biological integrity. The population control vaccine program is not a conspiracy theory. It's a documented conspiracy against humanity that is being implemented right now. Your government, your healthcare providers, and your media are either complicit in this program or afraid to oppose it. The only protection is your own informed choice and your willingness to resist medical interventions designed to control and harm you. This is Director James Morrison. They're coming for your biology, your freedom, and your future. The question is, will you let them have it?